Welcome to Feeling Seen, the podcast about the movies that make us feel seen. I'm talking with a legend of indie horror today, the prolific Larry Fessenden. He has a huge body of work as a writer-director and as a producer. And in that role of producer, he has helped a lot of young filmmakers get their start. He has worked as an editor. He has even had a MoMA retrospective. His latest film is Blackout, about a man who thinks he's a werewolf. It's obviously a theme that speaks to Larry. The character he brought for us is Lon Chaney Jr.'s titular wolf man, a character who happens to be named Larry also in the original 1941 version of The Wolfman. Larry, what else do the people need to know about you before we get started? What could we possibly leave out?
No, that's plenty. I've done all those things. I also act in movies, so I get to be on a lot of different sets, which is, very wonderful education. I consider myself a filmmaker. Whatever it takes has sort of been my policy over the years to inspire young filmmakers, and that's why I have the producer moniker, because I'm a cheerleader and a therapist for the kids. Mm-hmm. I've made a lot of people's first-time movies, and now they're all more famous than me, so good for them. Ty West, Jim Mickle, Kelly Reichart, all, she's out of the genre, of course, but a great filmmaker as well.
You run Glass Eye Picks, your production company. You are New York-based. I'd imagine you've made your trips out to LA over the years, but you're an East Coast, upstate New York-based filmmaker. You have really kind of done it your own way since the 1980s. And that is a really challenging thing to do. But you seem to, I was reading, I found somebody posted an article that they had written, an interview they had done with you in the 1990s. You were working on Habit at the time.
Oh, wow.
And it was crazy. They were like, I found this old interview and repubbed it on their site. And it was really striking to hear your candor and your sort of motivating ethos to be really similar to interviews that I was reading with you promoting Blackout going through the festival circuit.
I mean, maybe I just don't have anything original to say after a certain point. But the truth is, I have these basic principles I put on my website in the 90s. And I sort of stand by them. And one of them is important because it's that, I say that truthfulness is the one thing you have over budget. In other words, if you are candor, you're giving something to the audience that is unique to yourself. And I do think, that's how I try to inspire the kids. I'm like, don't waste my time trying to break into showbiz. Yeah. Offer something unique that's going to be very much your own, and that'll be something special. If you pull it off, then it'll be something that you can offer that has nothing to do with budget. It has to do with your own, inner search and so on. So, and the other principle, which is very true to my thing, is it's all of the work combined that ends up telling the story of who an artist is. It's not any one masterwork. It's sort of the consistency. So, I can't remember the other principles, but those were some of the ideas. I think the other one, unfortunately, was you can make movies without a big budget. Well, that's bitten me in the ass over the years.
Well, that was reading. Actually, it felt like a great sort of time to catch you in working through the arduous tale of getting Habit out into the world. Right. And you were talking about how that movie cost $50,000, and you seem to feel generally much more positively about that than the process of making No Telling, which was a $500,000 movie. Right. And it really seemed to affirm in a testimony, listen, budget's not going to make you happy. You weren't necessarily liking how you had to work to make that movie or the way you got to, but the way it sort of pinned you down. So you work lean. Yeah. You keep the shop nimble.
I like that. Exactly. Nimble is a word we often use. And I also, there's an aesthetic to it as well, which is that, you're interacting with the real world. Even Habit, we shot on the streets of New York without permits, sneaking around. And there's something dynamic, and the world becomes a participant in the vision. And I do think, I would say that's a great principle. And you look at the difference between Jaws and Jurassic Park, if I could use, very familiar movies. There's something exciting about Jaws. He clearly couldn't control the environment he was on. He was on a boat. Everything was going wrong, and yet the filmmaking is incredible. Jurassic Park, obviously the filmmaking is great, but there's something sort of contained. He had total control, although those dinosaurs weren't behaving either. So I like to have that element of danger, and it does make the whole thing a little stressy, but it's kind of part of the sport of filmmaking, the if you will, the vigor of it, and that's what it's just my aesthetic. There's many ways to make movies, of course.
Well, your newest movie that you have written and directed will feed into the character choice. Tell me about Blackout, your new film.
Yes, it is a kinship with Habit and with Depraved to some degree, because I'm sort of reimagining the famous tropes of the old Universal horror films, only in that my central character is a familiar monster. In this case, with Blackout, it's a werewolf, and it's a wolf man, which is nowadays people are oriented to the 1980s makeup where the werewolf had an extended face, more like a wolf. But I grew up with the idea of the wolf man, which is a flat face and a bunch of fur on the guy's face and maybe some fangs and pointed ears if you can afford them. So that's what my picture has. And it's a story of a guy who lives in upstate New York. He thinks that he's a werewolf, and he blacks out. That's the name of the movie. And he's also a drinker. So he's sort of an unreliable narrator, but he's decided this is the day that he has to end it all before he kills again, so to speak. So it's also a movie, it's like a journeyman film where he goes through the town and has interactions with people to say goodbye, and, put his house in order. So it's kind of, well, the problem with my movies is they're philosophically minded. And so I'm interested in existentialism and just sort of, the meaning of life, while I also love monsters. So I think for some horror folks, it's a bit of a disconnect, and they just want to get to the business at hand. But I think in a way that's what makes my movies unique, and it's why they have to be low budget, because they're not massive crowd pleasers, commercial oriented pieces. But I'm pleased to be able to contribute to cinema in some way with what I have to offer.
I mean, volumes. You've contributed volumes, so it goes beyond the measure of some way. But as I said, your this latest movie, and throughout movies that you've touched on with monsters and invocations of those classic tales throughout your career, the choice that you brought to the table for the character for us to discuss today is the Wolfman of the 1941 Universal picture, The Wolfman.
Yeah, I mean, so I think I deliberately wanted to, choose a fantasy character, because what I feel strongly, and I've always felt this is what my movies, they are a conversation about loneliness, anxiety, social anxiety, and so on. Things that are actually in the major conversation now in the culture. But, I was starting these things in the 90s, and it wasn't common for a dude like myself making horror movies to sort of lean into the idea of vulnerability. But in a way, that's what I wanted to express. I grew up very nice family, a whole thing, but still felt alienated as a kid. Maybe because I like monsters, but I think ultimately because I was just a sensitive kid and maybe wanted to be an artist in a family that didn't understand all that. So the point is what I love about monsters is that they're metaphors for any number of outsider ideas, what it feels like, so you could be, queer, you could have any number of issues, and yet it's a werewolf movie. So, the dilemma of the movie is something that is, it's a fantasy character, but I think when it's well drawn, you can relate to it, and you can relate to it whatever your own issues are, if you have, as I say, queer or poverty or anything, but basically everybody has a feeling of outsiderness. And so I think this is the strength of the horror tropes. Obviously I had to choose one, so I chose the Wolfman. I had a fondness for him because he also, I like the conceit of the character that he's a normal person some of the time, and then other times he loses control, and then he has remorse, and so all of these ideas. It's no secret that some of my movies are about, a lot of my movies have an element of alcoholism, so there's the idea of addiction. And I think, once again, even addiction isn't just alcohol or heroin. It's, our culture is rapacious and hungry and destructive. And so what is it about the human animal that's so fucked up, and so there you have, again, I felt seen, so to speak, because I felt that the werewolf was a metaphor that different people could access and have a relationship to. And I do feel that's the power of fantasy cinema is and fantasy stories. Is that you can have a character that people can relate to for their own personal reasons. So I'm kind of advocating for metaphor.
Yeah. No, I was very excited when you presented a universal monster because aligned with so much of the work that you've made and what you've talked about in interviews, themes and through lines that interest you. And I have written and talked about so much about the metaphor that as a marginalized person, that is sort of one of the great beauties of horror cinema, that you can overlay onto these stories of the marginalized. And perhaps if you're, if there's an anger in you, that marginalization is something that also gives you power that you can fight back with and perhaps take bloody vengeance with. And a through line that I have found in discussing the Wolfman specifically is I've talked to a lot of gay men who feel a lot of resonance with that character of the notion of something inside you that you can't stop, that bursts out and becomes this social blight, if not murdering, killing people, ripping out their jugulars. And there's also a continual description of the character I found in conversation that they've found him to be the loneliest of the universal monsters. Yeah. And I wanted to hear you talk about him as a lonely character.
Well, that's true. And it's very much, he wears it on his sleeve. I mean, Lon Chaney is going around. He's particularly, if you really think about it, it's an interesting character, 1940s. It's no Cary Grant. It's not, James Cagney. It's really a guy who's got problems with his father, getting along with his dad. He's trying to hook up with this woman, but that's, he's almost pathetic, and therefore hopefully sympathetic. But so in a way, he was quite an unusual leading man, if you will, in the 1940s, very vulnerable. And then obviously he had his little curse problem. So, but
and he's a vulnerable man, but he's also he's so big.
Yeah, exactly.
Lon Chaney Jr. is a sizable man, and they make a remark about he comes home after 18 years to take over the family castle and run operations.
As one does.
as one does. And he's out of he's about ready to walk into the house at one point, and his father's talking to somebody else.
Big boy, isn't he?
Huge.
Like the Red Talbot there.
We should have had him in the Guards.
Oh, no. He'll be invaluable here, looking after the estate. He's had a lot of experience in America.
He's this imposing figure who should be able to move through the world with sort of a competence and aplomb. But then, you see him, like you said, hitting on that woman. He's being a womanizer, and he's being just, really annoying about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me, how did you know about the earrings in my room?
Oh, I'm psychic. Every time I see a beautiful girl, I know all about her. Just like that.
Well, what kind of can would you like? We have day wear or evening wear?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
There's this one that's very smart. Solid gold top.
No, I don't think that'll do.
Well, how about the little dog? That would suit you.
There is that minimizing of the self in the face of something so big and strapping, I think is a really interesting contrast.
Yeah, absolutely. So but to continue discussing werewolves and so on, obviously there's a movie Ginger Snaps, which is about, I mean, I guess it's also a queer movie, but the bottom line is about menstruation, which is such a great thing to realize. Oh, right, the full moon, the cycle of the moon and so on. It's about a teenager coming of age. And so there again, you see how the metaphor is, and yet you're still enjoying the artifice of it because it's a metaphor. And I always say, there are many dramas to make movies about coming out or alcoholism or addiction or, even depression or loneliness. And yet what I enjoy is that you can cloak that in a fantasy story. So in a way, it's more, it allows it to be accessible and everybody can take something of it that they particularly relate to. And as you say, maybe they have their own secret or their own thing and they can go, oh, that's what it feels like. So it's sort of the truth of a feeling as opposed to the truth of your representation, which is not obviously to criticize representation, but I don't want to lose. As we are celebrating and moving forward with more and more marginalized characters on the screen, let's not lose the power of the metaphor to also be a way to connect people, to unite people through storytelling. That's my pitch for Wolfman.
Okay, so then, you're like, you're wanting to emphasize metaphor, you're wanting to underscore metaphor, and the practice of building that sort of tabula rasa projection on. So, with that, as we have become a culture that is more adept in the language of like grief and trauma and all those things in horror, and you're wanting to underscore also that we, keep communicating in metaphor and art, are you finding that imagination is as on offer or as welcome in the work that you're making as we lean more explicitly toward hard language of like representation and identification of, feeling, emotion, trauma, all that? Like, do those things jibe with each other, or is there a tension there between those two things?
Well, there's always a tension, and I want to say that it's not the deeper meaning, but the other aspect of what I'm trying to do is I'm taking familiar stories and trying to reimagine them so they're sort of fresh. And so it's really a conversation about what we take for granted about sort of the setup of our society, but even religion, and remember that a philosophical point of view and a cultural point of view is also a construct. And we happen to be in a world now where everything is, we think it's more open and explicit, and everything you describe very articulately. So, but we're still just in a historical moment where that is our conversation. So I'm also saying, not that one thing is right or wrong, but I just want to point out that, when you make a modern movie with a werewolf in it, you're already saying, we all know this is silly, or this is a trope, this is... Yeah. And so there's a tension between, it's funny when people argue about the rules in the movie, like, well, he didn't get killed by the silver bullet. What's going on?
Right.
And part of my point is like, life doesn't work the way we set up these structures, even the legal system or the money system. And of course, the real point is capitalism and other things, and maybe religion, whatever it's called, organized religion. In other words, those things they're constructs that we live with, and they're dangerous. We have to always be aware of the reality of, in a way, just sort of an existential random life, and then that we're trying to control it and understand it. So even our so-called honest conversations, let's remember that we're just in a moment. So that's all I'm saying, is that my movies are always in tension, the tension between sort of a kind of existential reality and stories and structures and mythologies that we have come to love and that we abide by. But let's never forget, because as soon as you start believing it, and that's what's happened to our political system, is that the two sides, and it didn't always used to be just two sides. Now the two sides believe only in their truth, and so I would like a movie that sort of reminds us that it's an ongoing mission to communicate and also to be inclusive. So that's last thought, is that if representation in a movie, if you say this is a queer film, then I'm always worried that you've just marginalized it for that community, so they feel seen. But I want to make a werewolf movie with those themes in it, themes about connection and being who you are or what have you. And then you're using the metaphor for a lot of people to watch, and but obviously the idea right now in our cultural moment is to represent on screen. So there's no right or wrong, but those are the things that do interest me.
Well, and obviously with a werewolf story, it's a bit like a sort of Jekyll and Hyde tale of having the two. The conversation of the two, and how they often exist at odds with one another, but are they a manifestation of the primal instinct within when you get toward the baser or perhaps more quote-unquote evil side of the story? Yeah. And I wanted to hear about you relating to your own two wolves, perhaps, in like when you started watching these movies as a when you were younger. I don't know when. Did you have some of those turmoil conversations that we see poor Larry having to have with his father in this movie?
Yeah. Oh, well, when you say poor Larry, you see my back went up, because that's I thought you meant
poor Larry.
What is this story about a man turning into a wolf?
You mean the werewolf?
Yes, sir.
Well, it's an old legend. You'll find something like it in the folklore of nearly every nation. The scientific name for it is lycanthropia. It's a variety of schizophrenia.
That's all Greek to me.
Well, it is Greek. It's a technical expression for something very simple. The good and evil in every man's soul. In this case, evil takes the shape of an animal.
I can figure out most anything if you give me electric current and tubes and wires, but something I do with my hands. But these things you can't even touch.
What's the matter with you, Larry?
Oh. Well, nothing, sir.
So the irony is that most of the anger I had turned into self-harm. So I was always a very, I never went to a shrink, but it's so obvious that that was my response to the horrors of the world. I was never particularly violent to others or angry, but also the werewolf there's a sense of freedom from all restrictions and running around. I have that in my own film. I just have scenes where he's just running through the fields and he's not killing people. He's just being like, so
Yeah.
I related to that sense of throwing off the shackles of society in a way. But, I never had, I'm generally a pissed off person, but I never would presume to harm others. So I wasn't like fantasizing about ripping out the jugular. It's why my movies aren't violent, which is another reason the horror crowd is a little eye-rolly. They're like, okay, with this sad sack werewolf story. But that's fine. I think I fill a little niche,
Like you say, and like we've been talking about, horror can be such a fantastic palette to cast yourself onto.
Yeah.
Because like you have this guy who's been bitten by a werewolf, so therefore he is cursed and he's going to become a werewolf, and he's really struggling with that, obviously, because he doesn't want to hurt people and he doesn't know what he's responsible for when he's in his wolfman state. But there's this really sad, as you watch him become more and more sure of what's happening to him, he's trying to sort of find validation in it from other people around him. So you've heard of this werewolf thing. What do you think about that? Is that real? And he's trying to, and there's one doctor that's willing to sort of talk to him on a empathetic level about a man's mind can really force him into any place, if he's gone astray. But then there's this refrain from his dad that is basically kind of reinforcing the time-honored tradition of ostracizing the other, where he's trying to explain this thing that's happening to him, and his dad, rather than accepting that it could be real, just keeps telling him that he's sick.
Yeah, exactly.
I was bitten. Look. The pentagram.
That scar could be made by most any animal.
Yes, but it's the sign of the werewolf. They say that he can see it in the palm of the hand of his next victim.
That's hard to believe.
I saw it. Tonight, in Gwen's hand.
Larry. How can I help you get rid of this fear, this mental quagmire you've got yourself into? What can I say to you?
You don't understand. You think I'm insane. Why... What's that?
Well, that's Paul Munford and the men. They caught nothing in the trap, so now they're going to hunt the wolf.
They're out hunting for me.
Stop it!
And I was watching that, and I was like, it makes sense that for almost 100 years, this movie could speak to people and have them be like, yes, I have encountered that moment where I tried to tell people what was true about me, and they would rather believe that I was sick than what I am is real and is true. And that's fucking powerful to see.
I so agree. That's a wonderful description. And it reminds me of my own film called Habit, where the center scene of that movie is his drinking buddy and dear friend. He's basically like, I'm going to tell you something. My girlfriend is sucking my blood. And, I'm so scared. I don't know. I know it's crazy, but that seems to be what's happening. And then the friend, they don't connect. And that's the centerpiece of the movie. It's really about loneliness. It is that we all have our own subjective reality, and it's so hard. And that's why I'm so pissed now about the culture, is that we're weaponizing that. Something that is very natural and, in fact, even philosophical, and just the sadness of life. In my film, the quote is, "We live as we dream alone." This is, to me, just the existential condition. And actually the role of art, but even politics, is to bring us together, find a commonality find tolerance and empathy, and then you go forward. But you're never lying to yourself that everyone is having a different experience, and that's what my films are about. I just find that a truth that you could work with if it's something you absorbed, and if everybody agreed. Well, there you go. As opposed to the absurd righteousness that we have out in the public sphere of everybody saying, the other guy is wrong. I just, just as an artist, I'm interested in that as basically, to me, it's sort of the ultimate theme, and all things come from there. I mean, everything from philosophy to how to solve problems, literally in politics. And then, so anyway, once again, I'm just inspired by what you're saying. I can't remember if you asked the question, but I think the theme is so important. Oh yeah, you were talking about Wolfman and of course, another thing that's funny that's happened in the world is that gaslighting is something we all experience now, on the internet and everything. And that's just comes from one movie. The whole term comes from one movie where a husband...
Gaslight!
The husband is making the wife feel insane. It's actually Ingrid Bergman. And it's just like you're saying. He's like, I think you must just be sick, darling. I don't know what you're talking about. And it's because he's changing the lights on the... They had gas lights in those days. So she's like going, am I going crazy or not? And, that's what our dear politics feel like now. So, yeah.
It is time for a quick break, but I will be right back with more from Larry Fessenden. Then I will have one quick thing before I go about the new movie Challengers. The latest from Luca Guadagnino and the latest from Zendaya.
It's Webby season. Hi, I'm Sequoia Holmes, host of the Black People Love Paramore podcast, and we are nominated for a Webby for the episode where I interviewed Hayley Williams. In case you're unfamiliar, Black People Love Paramore is a podcast delving into the common and uncommon interests of Black people in order to help us feel more seen. We would love your vote to help us win this Webby. Please take a second and go over to the Black People Love Paramore podcast social media accounts, and you can find them at BPLP Pod across all social media platforms. Hit the link in bio and vote for Black People Love Paramore.
Hi, I'm Travis McElroy.
And I'm Teresa McElroy.
And we're the hosts of Schmanners.
If you're looking for a good place to jump into our show, we really recommend either the Playgrounds episode or the Job Interviews episode.
Or if you want to go way back, you can check out the episode where we compare the differences between afternoon tea and high tea. So check out those episodes and new episodes every Friday on Maximum Fun or wherever you get your podcasts.
Somebody who would go on to make so many films in so many capacities with this sort of motivating communication drive and connectivity to sort of the conversation and people and delving into existential questions and us connecting around sort of the hearth of that process of making and viewing. When did you go from somebody who was just like watching movies and enjoying them to watching them and enjoying them still, but to also realizing that they had that capacity?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, I was an actor in high school and stuff like that. And, I just, there again, that's about empathy. And I always say that that's how I didn't train as an actor, but I read a script and I'm like, so what is this person? Where are they coming from? And then you go from there. And, maybe you have an accent or a hunchback, but the bottom line is that you're really just trying to imagine, when you play a villain, you don't play a bad guy. You play a guy who believes this other thing. And, it serves the story that he's the villain, but as far as the way you would play it, you're once again being empathetic to some degree. But then, I remember I did see a Hitchcock movie and I was like, I don't know what it is about this. There's something really cool. And I started thinking about where the camera goes is how the story is revealed. And it just led me on this lifelong love of sort of the construct of movies and how they work and how the music is so important. And, it just became like all the other art forms that I had loved. I used to draw as a kid and so on, write books and all this silliness. So it's just a medium that I love, and it really is all the other mediums. I always say when I start a film, I look at paintings and let's just say I look at paintings and then movie ideas come to me. So it's not just movies. And, in the 70s when I grew up, you didn't know how movies were made. It was all so mysterious. Right. And that was so incredibly wonderful. And now I just feel everybody's so, and even the way they watch films, they're so sort of over it. Oh my God, I've seen it all, and this and that. And I find it demeaning to the work, which is trying to be an offering. And I mean, obviously I'm talking about if you get a bad review, you're like, well, fuck you. It's all fine. But it does feel like we're so media savvy now that we've maybe lost the sort of the little sparkle of innocence and awe that I want the arts to offer. And that's why there's a childishness to my interests, which is monsters. It's because I do believe you're trying to capture some of the childhood just glee at reality and life. And I think if we had more of that, we'd be less rapacious and destroying the world because we just want more and more shit. It's like, step back for a minute. We're going to have a fucking eclipse in an hour. It's like, let's take a pause. This is incredible. Let's enjoy the details of life and so on. I mean, easy to say when you're stressed out with work, but I would argue even there, just take a chill pill and try to appreciate, health and comradeship and so on.
You've been an independent cinema maker for so long. You've always known the struggle of pushing the rock up a hill that is getting an independent film made.
Yeah.
And so that's always going to be very challenging. Have you found, has that creep of, well, I've seen it all, has that creep that it seems to come off of sort of the cultural tenor of consuming art and media now, does that creep into the people that you're trying to go to finance things? Are you finding that from a systemic level of just getting things made? Does that kind of get saddled on you now, or is that more of an audience level?
No, of course, because the executives, I mean, it really is just like everybody's jacked up, Yeah. And, the first thing they'll say is there has to be more conflict. Blah, blah, blah. People are used to this and that. More. And you're like, well, no, actually, I'm interested in the cinema of less. And, it's not like I'm unique in this. There's someone like Kelly Reichart. She makes films that are very quiet, and you have to lean in. And I just personally find that interesting. The conflict or the particular sweet sauce that I'm involved in is that I want to have that lean in, quiet cinema with a monster running around. So I admit it's a little bananas, but as I say, someone has to fill that niche. I'll do it. It's fine. Yes, the executives, they have no time. Look, I'm not deliberately making low budget movies. It's because I tried to bust into Hollywood many times, and the meetings are always exciting. The whole thing is thrilling, but it also goes nowhere. And you pitch an original story, and they're like, "Well, funny you mention it. We have a comic book here. If you would adapt that," and you're like, "Well, I'll look at it." But the whole point is, I want to make original work. I don't want to. I mean, obviously, if they gave me a Spider-Man movie, I would see what I could do with it. But, and let's face it, Christopher Nolan is, powerful because he made Batman movies. That gave him a leg up. So, and he did them well, or he made something special about them. So, blah blah blah. I'm not here. I'm not going to do Marty's thing of dissing Marvel, but we all know what I probably think of Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, we can. I think we can read between the lines on that one. Something I found really interesting in reading in that article that this wonderful writer posted on their website.
What's this article? I want to track it down.
It was from SonnyHatton.com is where it's posted. And I've gleaned from your conversations over the years that you're not much of a fan of how streaming releases are handled. But I saw this part where you were talking about the difficulty of getting Habit distributed in the 90s. And it just underscored to me what a fucking Rubik's Cube solving distribution for an independent film is always going to be. And I loved this part where you said, I don't often do this, but I try to save it for when I really like the quote. You say, you start to see, when you're trying to get Habit out in the world, you start to see how difficult the distribution business is and why Titanic does matter to everybody because it's putting people back into the black while little films are just breaking everybody's bank account. And that feels like you could be saying that in 2024. I was like, damn, it has been a bitch out here for so long.
Absolutely. And, you know,
like that refrain of like, there needs to be more original stories, there needs more independent movie. Like you've been saying this since the mid 90s when Sundance was blooming and independent film was having an incredible burst through and new queer cinema is happening. And you're still like, there's a reason why we don't get more originals and more small films, guys.
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, the irony is that at the same time, the breakout movies, I mean, I was just thinking of Moonlight. Is that what it's called? I'm always quoting the Cher movie, but
the Barry Jenkins movie, Moonlight.
Exactly.
Yes. Yes, not Moonstruck. Moonlight.
So I
two
always
good
call
movies.
it Moonstruck because I do cite that movie a lot. I do not Moonstruck's fun too, but Moonlight is just such an incredible treasure. And all I'm getting at is that's you know it's a breakout film. So there, but then that feeds the fantasy of the filmmaker, which is, I think, probably a good thing. But the point is, that's not the path for every wonderful indie movie in any genre. You know, there's Babadook or something. You know, it does happen, and then you know that's wonderful, and that's how people get started. But there's many probably equally interesting movies that don't get a chance, and you know that's. So it has always been, and it, you know, everybody loves to say it's show business and all that. I get it, but you know, when you're in the moment and you have a movie that you feel is valuable, then you have to fight for it. That's what I was doing with Habit. It was not. It didn't get into Sundance. It wasn't supported. So I actually said, I've already spent a certain amount of money on it. I'm going to spend now time to put it out because I think it's worth it. And to some degree, that was the right thing because. Otherwise, it would have literally disappeared, and no harm done except to me. But I think having it out in the world was the right move, and that was part of the business model that got me as a producer. Is that not only did I make Ty West's first movie, but then I put it in theaters, and you know, it took care of itself. It was well liked. But I'm just saying, you know, but I continue this model that I started to find interesting was just sort of give a movie more of a profile by doing a theatrical run, and even Blackout. You know, it's very hard to get theatrical space now with a little film, but you know, we're sort of peppering it here and there, and it's having the feeling that it's out there in a bigger way. And then it'll go to streaming, and that's where people will actually watch it if they do. So be it.
What a bargain!
Yeah, exactly.
What a bargain!
That's the bargain, exactly.
Well, and so I wanted to hear from you too, like as a filmmaker who does so much, like who is known to do so many jobs on set. This is very much like a movie around your community. Yeah. Like this is the process of making this is not necessarily wildly divorced from back when you were making Habit in the 90s. Right. And I wanted to hear from you about from a craft and process perspective, what appeals to you about the movies, the Universal monster movies from that era? What appeals to you about the Wolfman from like just a director who is pulling all these images together with their team on screen to make them real?
Well, I think one of the keys to the magic of those movies is the makeup by Jack Pierce. And I mean, I'm already including Frankenstein because that to me is much more of a favorite film. We wanted to talk about Wolfman because he's a favorite character, but the movie Frankenstein is incredibly artful, and the pathos of his drama, the monsters experience, is well drawn because of Boris Karloff and his commitment, but also, but just the details, like the structure of his face is so beautiful, and he has these beautiful veiny hands and everything. So, you know, everything about it. And James Whale saw him in commissary and said, would you consider auditioning for this monster? So he was also just responding to the physicality of Karloff's whole makeup look. And then the makeup is just so unique. It's a pop icon. So those are the things that I was responding to. They're the themes that we've discussed of loneliness and outsiderness and marginal characters, very marginal when you're sewn together from body parts. But then there's just the aesthetic, and that's why I like Monsters. I think it's just the sort of the beauty and the grotesque, and you know, I like trees and animals, and that's my aesthetic. I don't love the matters of the human when I travel, which I don't even like flying, but I'd rather go see the tall trees in the West than go to a great city. It's just my nature. Of course, I love museums and what have you. But so once again, I never know what we're talking about. But
That's okay. We're finding our way.
we're finding our way through the woods, as it were, with the spooky night.
Well, that's something I've seen you go back to in interviews talking about. Blackout is this of the Universal monsters. The Wolfman is so much more like closely of the natural world.
Yeah.
He is himself an animal.
Right.
And your draw toward the natural and your draw toward the environment.
Right.
And is that something that's always is that part of why you've kind of stayed back east? Are you just kind of more grounded to the environment out there as opposed to, out here in the good old 30-mile zone of Los Angeles?
Well, listen, let me be clear. Los Angeles is beautiful, and you have actually much better access to your own beautiful environment and so on. I don't mean the fucking city. I mean you're close to beautiful things. So no diss to the West. In fact, it's cool. My kid is he's a great sort of camper driver. He loves the West, and he's reminding me that there's so much of America. So it's a great country everywhere you look, and the whole world is beautiful. And I have a great romance with Alaska because I went there as a kid, and then I made a movie. We didn't film in Alaska, but it's set there. And we filmed in Iceland. And once again, that movie is very much about the environment of the cold, the snow and all that. But I'm just inspired by the environment. I remember your question finally. Yeah, so I filmed upstate. I do that's the thing. Even if I had all the money, don't listen to this, executives. Even if I had all the money in the world,
turn it off, mute it.
Exactly. I really enjoy the tactile nature of making a small film. I'm the guy that you ask any art department, they're always like, that fucking guy, because I'll go and I'll move the stuff, every little detail is that's part of, so I just like to be involved in all the departments and if need be, I'll be the departments. And even with the locations for Blackout, there's 30 locations, and I got them all through handshake deals. I specifically said, well, I don't have the money, but I also want to lean into just, the importance of your word. We'll come from 4 to 6. We're going to be here that long. If you need us to leave, we can, where you're sort of working with other people. It's about the communication and the making deals like that. I mean, as I say, it was exhausting and confusing, and you didn't have backup plans, although you had to make them. You had to make the backup. So I like the danger of that. It's, it's like different types of music. There's classical music I love. Everybody has to know what they're doing. And then there's kind of a punk or a pub rock. That's a different vibe. And there's something about the spontaneity of it. So I guess I'm more in the punk pub rock world.
Well, I guess as I have to wind down with you, my last question would be that, as you said, you're I'm a pissed off guy. Are you finding in you've made so much work, and as you continue to make it, are you finding that your sort of preferred expression these days of that being a pissed off guy is that to express an anger or to find a hope with that sort of foundation of being pissed off?
That's a great question, because I just saw a lovely quote by Miyazaki where he said, no, I find the world to be terrible, but I'm not going to make movies that are just depressing. So, I mean, I'm pissed because I think we're missing an opportunity as a species to do good things. We have a lot of intelligence, and we seem to be slipping further and further away from an agenda of cooperation and kindness into this silly, self-involved vitriol. It's ridiculous. We literally are disconnecting from reality itself. And I actually mean both sides of the so-called aisle. I think everybody has become hysterical and more adamant and upset. And we're losing track of, life's riches and so on and so on. And the point is that, I mean, look, we have these 2 wars going on, let alone all the other little wars. The consumerism run amok. I mean, how many pieces of plastic can you consume in a day with your coffee and your fucking salads? I mean, this all sounds trivial, but no, to me, it's actually hurtful every moment of that. So that's why I say I'm pissed off. I also have, if you watch the end of Blackout, there's a sweet little speech he makes, and he just says, I don't know that life has to be conflict and all the time.
Yeah.
You miss the sweetness of it. And so in a way, that is my message, is just a cry for, some form of compassion, not just towards each other, but towards the world, the gifts. So that's sort of my jam. But underneath it is just a pissed off person because it's not working. But you don't want to you don't want to just be pissed and then fail at your own mission. You still have to take a deep breath and enjoy what is possible to enjoy. Anyway, that's the jam.
No, I so appreciate that as a note to go out on. And Larry, I so appreciate the work that you do, the work that you have always done, and just how much you continue to fucking stay out there. And I wish for many more movies, and I wish for more collaboration between you and the Barbara Crampton.
Yes, I agree. I just hung out with Barbara this weekend. What could be better? Now talk about a breath of fresh air in the world.
Larry, thank you so much for your time, and I so appreciate you being here and the work that you do.
Well, thank you for all your research. I really appreciate you reading all these interviews before you had to listen to me. So I appreciate your thoroughness. Well done.
Of course. Thank you, and good luck out there, and good luck with Blackout.
Thanks a lot.
What a pleasure to talk with the great Larry Fessenden. I mean, guys, if you are an indie filmmaker with a dream and you're like, how do I make movies? I want to be like, look at Larry's body of work. Look at what he's done. Look at just sort of by hook or by crook how he has been able to make dozens upon dozens of movies across his career. It is so inspiring. And Blackout, the new movie Blackout, is showing in select theaters now and is also available to rent or buy on most streaming platforms. And if you wanted to pair it with The Wolfman, which is a nice short little movie, you could watch both movies in under 3 hours. Look at that. A double feature that you will have done before midnight. You can get to bed. And now, that one quick thing before I go, you've been seeing, I mean, I know there are more billboards around in LA than most any other place, but I think you've been seeing the posters around. I'm told that TikTok's really been blowing up with promotion for it. The new movie Challengers, the one with that really beautiful poster of an illustration of Zendaya watching a tennis match, and you can see two little men in her sunglasses. I got the chance to go to its little red carpet premiere last night, which is always a fun and special treat. And so it was, everybody was all abuzz, waiting for Zendaya to get there. She introed the movie. She obviously looked immaculate on the red carpet. She looked immaculate introducing the film. She's fabulous. The movie is so much fun. I've decided, the trailer absolutely kind of promises you the movie that you're going to get, but the execution of the movie, I feel makes such unexpected choices to where you're going to feel on your toes the entire time. I feel like Josh O'Connor and Mike Faced, we all saw that trailer when it came out, and we were like, is this the same man that did they hit, copy and paste? Those two actors, they do such a great job as the buddies, the bros at the center of this movie, whose lives fall in and out and apart around Zendaya, Tashi Duncan, the tennis prodigy, who sustains an injury and then whose life becomes about sort of trying to fulfill herself despite the fact that she had to abandon her dream very prematurely in her life, and the emotional ins and outs and sort of sexual comings and goings and love and lust. It is so entertaining. The score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is intentionally so pulsing at times that it almost drowns out the dialogue, but it's a deliberate choice. You got to be in the motion, you got to be in the feeling, you got to be in the vibes. When Zendaya introduced the movie, she was like, feel free to get up and dance, this movie's going to make you want to do that. And I was bobbing in my seat throughout. It is so entertaining. Zendaya is electric. And honestly, for me, I think the big takeaway about this movie for me is Luca Guadagnino, director of Call Me By Your Name, director of A Bigger Splash, director of I Am Love, director of one of my favorite movies of literally all time, the 2018 Suspiria take that he did. His career And he acknowledged at the screening last night that this was the first red carpet, big fancy red carpet premiere he's had in his career, like a really big to-do where they like shut down streets and stuff. And he has been making movies for so long. I feel like he's become a zeitgeist figure if you're like a watcher and knower of movies and a watcher and knower of Hollywood. But truly the biggest thing for me is that Luca Guadagnino's career inspires me that art can still exist. This man is not bound by a genre. He is not bound by a language. He is not bound by a category. This guy just keeps getting to make his movies. He made like a cannibal movie starring Timothée Chalamet with bones and all. He made a 3-hour Suspiria in which Dakota Johnson opens up her chest to reveal her bloody, still beating heart. He made Call Me By Your Name. Now he's making Challengers. Like, this guy, he's like, whatever he wants. I'm sure it's not whatever he wants he gets to do. He announced a Call Me By Your Name sequel ages ago. I really don't think that's happening. But, like, he gets to do so much different stuff and seems to get to make movies, even if the studio's like, you know what? We're not going to make a ton on this, but it's going to be cool. I just feels like that has to be some sort of ethos of how Luca Guadagnino gets to operate. And I think it works, like, pretty almost every time, at the very least. He's inspiring. I love that his career exists, that he gets to do what he wants to do. I love his casting. I love his choices. And Challengers is a real hoot. So I hope you guys will go check that movie out in theaters, because even if this is like a bigger, fancier movie, Luca Guadagnino feels to me like the independent spirit of arty art house cinema that's weird enough to feel like a genre romp. So yeah. Challengers, what a time. That is our show. We did it. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at FeelingScenePod, or send us an email at feelingscene@MaximumFun.org. If you want to follow me, I am JorCrew on Twitter. Our theme music is by Andrew Epen. This show is produced by Marissa Flaxbart. Our senior producers are Kevin Ferguson and Laura Swisher, and this is a production of Maximum Fun.
Maximum Fun,
a worker-owned network
of artist-owned shows,
supported directly by you.